speaker. So those of you who don't know about Chris is probably one of the most famous female hackers in the world. And she is famous, so I just, if you don't know her, I'm going to tell you a funny story, which is a true story. So many years ago, there was a hack on the Department of Defense in America, and FBI had been looking for a hacker, and they discovered that the hack was actually coming from a school. And they stormed the school, and they were very surprised to find out that the hacker they were looking for was a 10-year-old girl. And that 10-year-old girl is Chris Kubecka. Chris, I'd like to invite you to come because we're going to talk about open source intelligence. Welcome.
Okay, I hope everyone can hear me, because they said I had to bring the microphone very close to my mouth on this one. So one of the things I want to show you tonight is how you can use different types of open source intelligence gathering to look at many different things, whether it's an IT system, an IoT system, or any sort of critical infrastructure, because I think all of us like electricity and water and, you know, lovely things like beer in a bottle, which I will definitely be partaking of later. So, he described me a little bit. Yes, I was unfortunately busted hacking at the age of 10. At the age of 18, the U.S. Air Force started to recruit me, and I went ahead and started working for them. I also was in U.S. Air Force Space Command, handling things such as hardening against, this is like a drinking thing, electromagnetic pulse, and I worked in a Space Operations Command, so a SOC of a different type than you might be used to, and also handling solar weather to make sure that our vulnerable systems were in safe places when we had space issues and solar issues. And I was also previously a military aviator. I was the third woman ever in enlisted combat as an aviation for the U.S. Air Force on the largest plane in the U.S. military's inventory called a C-5 Galaxy. So I'm rather partial to the word galaxy. So, we have a lot of challenges when we're dealing with hackers, from a 10-year-old to any of you in this room, and a lot of it revolves around the fact that there's a lot of entry points and exit points. There's also a lack of good testing. I think you've seen the sticker on the back here. This is from OWASP ZAP, and surprisingly, even security tools and vendors don't even bother to do that basic of a test by using something like this wonderful free OWASP ZAP tool. So we've got a lot of problems. There's also profit over vulnerability, which is still a huge problem. Lack of standardization. There's just a whole bunch of issues. And now that we have just more than your regular IT issues, like smart meters and so forth, these are all devices that can be affected by a lack thereof of digital security. So when we talk about critical infrastructure, I used to lecture for part of GCHQ called the Center for Protection of National Infrastructure, and I've been to every single nuclear facility here in the United Kingdom dealing with the engineers on the control networks specifically. I've also done a lot of water systems and a lot of different things for the UK government and other governments. Now, this picture is actually from China, as you may or may not have guessed, and it is actually part of an electrical power plant, which unfortunately was pretty easy to find because, hey, why not put up a web application that you can actually control with no authentication right on the internet? Does anyone think that's a great idea? Yeah, you see, there's a few. I think it's a great idea, right? You know. So here's one in Europe where, unfortunately, you can actually press the buttons for the master controls. One's out of Germany, and turn things on and off because, hey, who needs electricity in parts of Germany, right? No, right? No, they're just a big production country, right? This one was a very unfortunate one. So there are a few critical infrastructure protocols that when they were made back in the day, they didn't think about hackers, they didn't think about web application, they didn't think that they would even be on the TCP/IP networks. And one of these is called Modbus. Now, Modbus you have to, you can interact with, but it has to be sent commands in hexadecimal, and only certain commands can it take. And this one was very unfortunate because it had a web server on it, and also it was being controlled by a remote access Trojan. This particular remote access Trojan was actually being controlled by someone behind a Russian ISP called Vimpel ISP. And this happened to be a power plant somewhere in Europe. This same exact party that was controlling this particular power plant was also on a login for ABS, and wait, one of the big Dutch banks. ABN AMRO, that's what it's called. And it was very curious because I had to talk to a few ministers about the fact that this particular issue had been going on. And unfortunately, the EU does not have, say, an EU-wide cert that proactively looks and scans all of these different countries to see if there's a major problem. They leave it to the individual countries, and not every individual country either is proactive or is even mature enough to have any sort of tools or knowledge to be able to do any of this different stuff. So this is a water system in Italy. Italy is not quite as mature, we'll say, right now as the NCSC in the United Kingdom. This is an actual aqueduct, which they also produce some electricity as well. And this is an extremely interesting one. We caught a criminal gang taking advantage of the fact that there was a a German company that does a lot of shipping between logistics for both Germany and into Russia. And what they were doing was hiding illicit goods in and out and changing the manifest of the cargoes so that before anyone could check the containers, they would get all of their stuff out. So exposing some of these systems in logistics can have a major impact. Some of the things that were found were weapons that were used in minor terrorist attacks. This one's great. Over in Norway, they also were infected by the same rat that I had showed you previous. Salmon farming is a big part of their income in that particular country. So we see that agricultural systems can also be affected by these different types of things. And unfortunately, there was no need to even put in a login because there was no authentication. Yay! And you can turn things on and off if you wanted to, and you don't really want to kill a bunch of fish. Maybe you don't like fish. Please leave those ones alone. They're kind of nice. This one used to also lecture for the underground and the overground for transport for London. And they had a few problems because when you're dealing with critical infrastructure and also even public transport, the hardware that they buy, they imagine it's going to be in service from anywhere from 5 to 30 years, but yet they connect Windows or Linux-based systems with a lifespan of only 3 to 5 years, and these things have to be patched. And if you patch them, it might mean that the rest of the equipment loses its interoperability. And so that can be a big problem, and that's one of the reasons why they don't like to patch a whole bunch of stuff. Because if it's working today, why try to fix something if it ain't broke, right? So here's my favorite. If you're growing weed and you connect it to the internet, please turn on some sort of authentication because your weed grow kit can actually be found. Now that might not be legal here yet. It certainly is actually not legal to grow indoors in the Netherlands. But in many parts of the US, like in the state of Colorado, it's now a huge part of their tax base. So what if you were a super evil cat hacker and you wanted to affect something like that? You could just go through Colorado, geolocate, find a whole bunch of IoT grow operations and weigh them. Or maybe do some extortion before you allow the systems to come back up, right? So, who likes clean energy? Yay! The only person I've heard of that doesn't like it is Donald Trump. So, you can use different type of dorking, so not just say your Google dorking, but using certain keywords and strings with alternate search engines that are looking for systems. And beyond, say, your Shodan, there are quite a number of these things, both in English and a lot of them in China, specifically written to look at the Western world. And in this case, I wanted to give a demonstration for the EU Commission because I was giving them evidence about some of the major issues that were occurring in Europe and in the world. So we see a solar panel. We can see a whole bunch of solar panels because what happens is some of these alternate search engines will scrape all of the HTML and will also include any scripts that are running as well, so you can actually leverage them completely for all sorts of lovely dorking. And hey, if you have a solar panel with a web application, guess what? Fantastic! Because a lot of these particular vendors, they don't think that you could actually use this stuff to work. So they don't set up, say, a login immediately or some other barrier that then would not be scraped by various different types of search engines. So this is a very unfortunate thing. This one's wind turbines, and unfortunately Denmark has a whole bunch of wind turbines. Now when I used to do lecturing for CPNI, about 3 years ago they asked me to do a demonstration about what the UK looked like for wind turbines. And I was able to find a whole bunch of wind turbines. And about 83% of them still have the default credentials of admin. Sounds like a great idea, right? When you're doing a critical infrastructure demonstration. And then the UK was like, please don't show people that. We're going to have that changed. That's a good idea, right? Yeah. So, in addition to these things having, say, a web server or maybe a remote management connection or something like that, many times they've got other things that can be connected to them. And hey, I'm a hacker. I identify as a hacker. And I love databases. Because there's all sorts of things there. I also like other things, like, oh, how about some FTP? What kind of building control system might that be? There's elevators that you can find online, by the way. Who took an elevator up here? Who wants to take an elevator back down? There you go, right? So you can find a lot of these different things that are connected to things. Or, if you're a little bit evil like me, you can actually use them as a pivot point. And many times these things are not going to be monitored. So hey, how about that? You just opened a doorway into something that nobody else wanted you to open. So who has a smart meter? That's it? Really, I won't look up your home address, I promise. Right? Now there's a reason why in the Netherlands we have the right to refuse these things, and it's because they have not been properly security tested. And they don't consider privacy a big deal. So I did refuse mine in the Netherlands. And so, hey, they keep saying, well, we're going to meet certain treaties and so forth by trying to make the electricity much more efficient. And part of that plan is smart meters. So who doesn't want a better world, right? So I can find certain vendors that sell smart meters where they're hooked up directly to the internet because, again, they did not think about security or privacy, which is a bit of a shame because here's a login. This one happens to be in Poland, and it goes over HTTP, which, you know, that's kind of cool, right? You know, why do you need encryption for somebody's home smart meter? No. So then, luckily, I was able to use a little OWASP zap, and there was a directory transversal, and then I could bypass all the authentication and get in to see all the energy consumption reports, and if I wanted to, I could have most likely been able to adjust various things as well. So who thinks that that's a great idea? Yay, there's a few back there. You want me to go ahead and adjust your electricity rate? Yeah, I see some hands. Yeah. Yeah, so this can be bad. Now, here's an interesting one. In the United States and in Canada, they use, or we're going to use, a system called the Open Automated Demand Response. And what this is it's kind of like a bridge where it connects all these different types of protocols, many of them are proprietary, and goes, hey, you can control all this stuff from one particular web server. Yes! Now, in the documentation, it states very clearly, do not expose this to the internet because there is no security. So anyway, In 138 milliseconds, I was able to find 75 of them. Yeah, fantastic, right? And here's Kubecka, Canada, where it's a hydroelectric dam system. And, well, guess what? I was able to find it. And the cool thing about this, because it's an alternate search engine, is the properties that I use were actually the certificate itself and who it was issued to. So it isn't just HTML code. You can actually find a whole bunch of information off of the certificate properties. And I love to play with encryption. So luckily, it wasn't actually trusted except by themselves. It was using an outdated encryption, TLS 1.0. For these particular devices, they were also hooked up to a bevy of other things. And this is fantastic. Another key thing about a lot of critical infrastructure is they will almost always have some sort of remote management tool that they connect to because vendors have to perform maintenance. And most of the time the vendors will say, you got to use the tool we tell you to, or we cannot provide any service. And many times they will use the same credentials for every single customer. Doesn't matter if it's a nuclear, doesn't matter if it's water. If they have Honeywell, Honeywell might use the same credentials and some sort of weak remote management protocol. And you can't do anything about it because then you'll be going against their particular contract. And they'll say we can't provide you maintenance anymore. So let's step into aviation. Aviation is very interesting. I do like planes. Don't particularly like some planes. But that's okay. So how many of us have never flown in here? Nobody. So we've all been on an aircraft in one way, shape, or form. So in the aviation industry, they're kind of behind the times. And this is rather unfortunate because I can find airports. I can find luggage systems. I can find many different things. This one is still using what's called SMB version 1. Fantastic. Here is a wonderful remote desktop protocol login. Now, AMAS is now on Kali, which is fantastic. There's also another tool on Kali called Free RDP. So basically, if I can find your RDP, I can use that tool, and I can then own your RDP. So I love RDP. So does Russia. And hey, here's a traveler system where it's unencrypted, and you can go ahead and try to log in. And trust me, they don't do any monitoring because I share a lot of things. Here happens to be an Iraqi airport, and this particular airport is in a bit of a hot zone, so it's not very wise for it to be just hanging around on the internet. This is one that was actually attacked by drones earlier this year. I used to work for Saudi Aramco. I was the one that they called up in 2012 when the Iranians attacked them, taking out about 85% of their Windows infrastructure. So, yeah, that's a problem because that's a hot spot as well. Ethiopia, I was able to get into network devices, ticketing systems, and so forth. For a number of years, Ethiopia has actually been at war with Eritrea back and forth. So, believe it or not, Ethiopia has an offensive security capability. And they are the top in that particular region of the world because of the fighting back and forth with Eritrea. And this is Vienna, because it isn't just, we'll say, less than developed countries. To also give you a bit of a background, Paris-Orly Airport, they currently have a particular computer, and this is public information. It runs on Windows XP, and it's for part of their air traffic control system. They only have one employee who knows how to work it. It's on bare metal, not virtualized. And that particular person actually retires in 2021, and they have no plans to upgrade it until that person retires. And it causes so many problems that it gets knocked down on a fairly frequent basis, and then all of a sudden, all of the traffic around Paris, it even affects Charles de Gaulle Airport as well. So it's a pretty big problem. And yeah, no plans. Just no plans. Vive la France, right? Now, on this one, I ran into a bit of a problem where I promised that I would not say who this U.S. aircraft manufacturer was until I do a full aviation talk in November here in London, because by that point they have been told that they should be fixing their issues. So back in April, I was able to, I don't know if you can read this, laugh out loud, you probably shouldn't extrapolate from the website to flight control code. So aircraft nowadays are flying computers. And the flight control software that they use with all these different sensors and to do a lot of automated things, they're software based. And who thinks that they're properly security tested? I see one hand. Oh, you're so wrong. You're so wrong. So in this particular case, this U.S. aircraft manufacturer has no coordinated responsible disclosure program whatsoever. Yeah, we all fly on aircraft. That's fantastic, right? Yeah. They exposed the login system to get the flight control software that runs both civilian and military aircraft, classified and unclassified systems. They also exposed their entire test development area, and I can tell you, running security operations centers, we do not monitor those because there's load balancing, testing, and things like that, so it would always be false positives and looking like it was under attack. So what attackers can do is get on those systems and then use them as a pivot point. They can also, if they're an advanced nation state and they want to keep what's called persistence, see what the environment is going to look like tomorrow to maintain that access inside all the time. So it is definitely not a good idea to expose your test development system to the outside world because of predominantly those two issues. And in addition to this, unfortunately about 5 years ago, they decided they no longer needed senior developers. Sounds like a great idea, right? They no longer needed senior developers. It's okay. Their coding practices, I can definitely tell you, are quite poor. And so the U.S. government asked me not to communicate with them directly until they started handling the event. I was also contacted by the UK government to do the same thing. This particular aircraft manufacturer was very afraid of what my quote-unquote intentions were. And so they sent someone to my hotel in Las Vegas while I was in DEF CON to try to get me to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Who here thinks I signed that non-disclosure agreement? One person. Yeah, I don't believe in them. I do all my research out of the Netherlands, and we have very strong laws to protect researchers like myself. So the Dutch government is providing me protection for this particular case. So the U.S. government, Department of Homeland Security's critical infrastructure team has been putting a lot of pressure on this particular manufacturer because they do a lot of military and classified stuff. And so it's kind of a good idea. So I've been working on that quite a bit over the past month and a half because of the situation. So there's other areas like maritime. And I might actually be setting up something with someone, well, a country, on a demonstration of how you can actually steal a military vessel shortly. So that's going to be fun. I was working on it a little bit earlier today with them. And there are a lot of different things that you can do. One of my favorite ones is this automatic identification system. I don't know if you heard in the news about an Iranian oil tanker that the U.S. government was trying to stop, and it then would disappear and then pop up in another area of the world. Well, by naval law, maritime law, you are not allowed to turn that off. It's supposed to identify you, where a buoy is, where other ships are, so that you don't collide. Because sometimes you can't see anything at sea. So it was a system set up for all of these things and safeguards. Unfortunately, you can manually turn it on and off. There's a couple of other reasons why ships do this. Smuggling, pirating, and if there are refugees in the Mediterranean and they don't want to be obligated to rescue them. So we're seeing a trend where they just shut their AIS off. It's illegal, but nobody's been busted for it. You also have, and this is quite interesting, these are very, very large boats, cargo boats. And there's very little physical control anymore, so it's run over the GPS system. And it's not the military-grade GPS system, it's the same GPS system that your home drone would be on, the civilian system. And we've already seen that these things can be manipulated. Right now, Russia's set up in Syria an electronic warfare center that's been manipulating the civilian GPS system to keep drones from bombing them. And it's gotten so bad it's affected parts of Israel, and now pilots can no longer use GPS to take off or land. So in order to land at those two airports, you have to be a pilot that is certified to actually use manual controls. So if that gives you any idea how you could possibly steal a boat. Yes, you can. You also have different radio bands and things that are just not encrypted. There's also a little bit of satellite communication that comes back and forth. And if they happen to be lucky enough to have 4G, but many times there's a lot of 2G and 3G. And you can step those bands down and break encryption all the way down to 2G. Of course, you can jam things with Wi-Fi. And then, hey, who likes Windows? I like Windows. And a lot of these systems are running on a light version of Windows, whether that's a light version of XP or 7. It's called Windows CE. And they're used to control the screens and a lot of different things for what's called industrial IoT. So we talked about this lovely oil tanker. I think I sent a tweet, but I found out that the US government had offered the Iranian ship captain $1 million in cash to park it someplace where they could take it. And I'm like, I could own an Iranian boat for $1 million, right? Because all I have to do is rename it. You can actually rename your stuff, which is fantastic. This is an actual ship communications where, hey, why do you need a login? Why do you need encryption? You can just do whatever you want with it. It's a cargo ship. A lot of these other things, Telnet is really not the best protocol to be using to connect to. Unfortunately, there's a lot of it because just like the aviation industry and just like other industries, they're a bit behind. So I'm just trying to keep an eye on the time so I don't run over for the next speaker and then I can get beer. And this is actually what it kind of looks like. So an HMI is human machine interface. It's your monitor. And if you've ever heard of Stuxnet, part of the attack was the monitor display screen showed that nothing was wrong. Yay! I'm gonna steal that boat. So that's a problem. You can also find, and this is very interesting, these are routers that are used a lot by the Maritime Industry for industrial 4G. And the majority of this particular brand, we've known the private encryption key. So you can actually look it up by those particular properties. Because a known private encryption key means no encryption. And another one, you can find hack systems on ships. Yay! Please help me! My router's been hacked! So yeah, there's a lot of problems in this particular industry. And these types of things are used for ransomware attacks and extortion as well. So, space asset challenges. I did tell you I dealt with space stuff, right? Back in June, I was invited by the University of Oxford and De Montfort University to run a new space IoT hackathon at Royal Holloway University for cleared PhD students. And so for the 2-day workshop, thought it was fantastic. Introduced them to U.S. Air Force Space Command challenges, dealing with our own versions of cyber, and then also the reality of some of the attacks that have actually taken place against these types of systems. So we're dealing with systems that once you put them up in space, they're very hard to touch again, to fix again, to patch again, and many times because they're dealing with availability. Encryption means it's going to introduce latency. You have to encrypt, decrypt, encrypt, decrypt. And the Queen, we'll say some in England, is availability, not confidentiality in many of these cases. Because of that, you can do a lot of different things with various space assets. You can even do man-in-the-middle attacks in between unencrypted communications. Or many times, if they're using encryption, they might be using a very old cipher where we know that it might be able to be cracked. So hey, why not just collect that up and then beam it down and crack it on a land-based system, right? Another thing that we run into, and this actually happens here on Earth, is called bit flipping caused by cosmic radiation. Now there was one very interesting case in Belgium where they had a voting system and they're like, something's wrong because there's only 1,500 people and 4,500 people voted. And what they found was the software was altered because of bit flipping from cosmic radiation. Now you get less of it here on Earth because of various shielding. But up in space you do not have that shielding depending on how high the orbit is. So that's a continual challenge up there. So we actually awarded the winners of these particular space hackathon, and we're thinking about doing it nationwide, basing it in Surrey, United Kingdom, to broaden out the question of how do we secure new space asset moving forward. This was the winning team. They're great. They pose fantastically. It's the best pose ever from PhD students. And we additionally have other challenges where it isn't just, say, the problem with encryption. Recently, earlier this year, Elon Musk, you like that? One of the things you can't see from the back, so threats to satellites, who are the assailants, and it goes nation states, hacktivists, multinational corporations, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, and other aliens. Right? So earlier this year, Elon Musk sent up the beginning portion of something called Constellation. And this is to provide higher speed internet access around the world. And they launched it from the United States. When they filled out the paperwork, the FTC, who governs this, their forms were behind the time, and they did not ask for what type of communication, satellite to satellite, they would be using. So Elon Musk is using laser to laser, which is unsurveillable, and did not have to declare that. Whoops. So they're not changing their forms. It's a very good system. It's a very nice mesh system and so forth, but I'm sure you've heard of the argument from various governments, maybe we should end this encryption thing because they want to be able to surveil things. Now they're faced with basically a multinational and very powerful corporation that has created a fast system, but you can't surveil it. And it's not making them very happy, to be honest with you. So, yeah. How many of you remember this older movie from, was it James Bond movie? It was called Moonraker, yeah. Right? Really rich dude starts taking space stuff and astronauts out of space and tries to blame and make it look like each nation was doing this for his own evil cat purposes. I think he did have a white cat, right? It just seems like they should have a white cat. So now we're faced with the possibility that if you have enough money, you can actually launch for about 7,000 euro a smaller satellite system. And what if you put propulsion onto that? You can then weaponize it, and you can launch a bunch of these from Kazakhstan, outside of regular control. So one of the other things that we're looking at doing with the University of Oxford is to set up a blue team competition and a red team competition using some of these smaller space satellites which are in low orbit. And we've spoken to the ESA to make sure that space debris won't be a problem. So in case they go smashy smashy, I want to do smashy smashy with the satellites, it won't cause a problem because obviously we would not want to cause more space debris issues up in space. So that's one of my next really fun projects, which I can't wait to start. Who wants to play with satellites? Yeah, all right. By the way, I've been asked to help run the Space Hacking Village next year in DEF CON. So definitely stop by, right? Because you gotta have fun with life, right? Even in space. So you can actually find new space IoT systems, and sometimes they're on the internet. Isn't that fantastic? I love it. And this is kind of a bit of a problem because you don't necessarily want to find these particular things because you never know what they might be running, right? Or what effect they might have. Now, there's also a symbiotic, well, there's a relationship between satellites and aircraft. So the live navigational maps that an aircraft now receives is actually sent from a space satellite. So it's set unencrypted in most cases. What if you were able to interfere with that and change the map? To give you a bit of a background, my area of expertise that I advise various governments, including the EU Parliament, and the UK, and the US, and so forth, is actually cyber warfare. So, how to kill people with technology is the best way to describe it. So, these types of things can be used against us by naughty people or naughty governments. And we want to be very careful with these things. So down to our regular houses, because a lot of us have various IoT assets inside our house beyond a smart meter. And this was kind of funny. When I showed this graphic at the EU Commission, I was not aware that one of the rules were that you could not make people laugh. And I made one lady burst out laughing. So I was kind of pleased with that one. So I wanted to show the EU some of the problems with home alarm systems. Now many of these are IoT systems, and again, they have not been properly security tested. So what if I could remotely shut off your burglar alarm system and then just walk in and grab exactly what I wanted? Link it up with your Facebook history when you're going to be out of town. Hey! Or when your kids put out that they'll be out of town. Children, they always give you away. So France has a huge problem with these particular types of things. Another one is fancy schmancy washing machine systems. So Melly has this great system where if you pay a bunch of money, you can get an IoT smart washing machine and dryer. And then if you have multiple Melly appliances for 800 or 900 quid, they'll sell you a hub that also connects directly to the internet. I've been trying to contact this company for 2 years. They don't have any way to contact them about the security problems. They also have commercial systems that are very popular in Denmark, where you pay, and I've been able to get into those systems as well and alter the payment. Again, they won't contact me. So you can find, because it has a web server. I like to say, if it's got a web server, attack it like a web server. Doesn't matter if it's a printer, doesn't matter if it's a home alarm, or a washing machine. And so here's the hub. It's pretty groovy. You know, hey, why not pay all that money just to get right into a system? And what's even better is they hard-coded the username into the login for some of this stuff. Yes! Woohoo! Best money I ever never spent. I don't buy these things. They scare me. I know too much. And here's an actual smart home. So this particular company sells a service and an application to control all of your IoT, including internal and external cameras, appliances, smart plugs, your home water heater as well. And there's no encryption. And I was able to bypass all the authentication because in the code itself, always look at the page source. You can find juicy stuff in the page source. You can just bypass everything, and then, hey, I could see into the living room. Who wants me to see in their living room? Nobody. Please, no. So there's a few problems when it comes to various different types of IoT out there, and many of us have these different things. So I tried to leave enough time for questions. Yes, I did. Fantastic. So I do really say, you know, if you leave stuff on the internet, and I can find it, and it really is like free candy for me. But aren't you glad I'm on the good side, right? Right? I'll actually be presenting a case of cyber terrorism at the annual Europol-Interpol conference, and for my keynote next week, it'll also be on a cyber terrorism event that I helped avoid in the Netherlands. So I am on the good side, but I love to have fun with this stuff. So I'll go ahead and open it to questions.
So this is the offensive side. What would be the best practice for enabling legacy systems to actually put them online in a safe way?
What about it?
So, yeah, talking about the defensive side now, so because this is all offensive, so is there like a secure way to put legacy systems online? Because it's infeasible to re-implement all of the systems in a secure way, right?
Yes, there are. So this is one of the things I've talked to several vendors, including Honeywell, is when they've got their web apps that are showing online, for them to not advertise, hey, it's a Honeywell controller. or it's this, that, or the other. So change it up so that there's nothing that can be immediately scraped. And that way you can't really find these things very easily. You have to do a lot of work. And many of these systems, if they can be found easily, then they can be attacked easily. So always try to increase the amount of effort that anyone has to do to attack your system. And that is one of the easiest ways to actually hide these systems online if you cannot put them behind some other method. And it's a very easy update, just on the web app portion.
Any more questions? Yep.
Do you think bitcoins are safe?
A little louder?
Do you think bitcoins are safe?
No! So, I've actually been working with Bellingcat, Europol, Census, and an intelligence apparatus to track Bitcoin mining by the last blocks of different systems, both in regular countries and sanctioned countries, and those blocks can be traced to coins that are on watch lists for human trafficking and illicit arms trafficking. So we've been developing a system for the last couple of months, since July, during my last big visit here in London, doing that.
Cyber warfare question. As you said, your specialty is there. How long do you predict then that the Mars satellites will stay in orbit before China accidentally fires missiles into them?
Yeah, China loves firing land-based missiles into space and destroying things and causing a huge amount of space debris. So I think that the moment it comes close to providing internet access that isn't available to Hong Kong and Taiwan, then it will be immediately at risk.
Any more questions?
So quite a lot of your examples of unresponsive companies and things were consumer services within the EU. So is there a scope to use the information commissioners of the GDPR to actually go after those companies via the regulators if they're unresponsive via direct approach?
Yes and no. One of the things, this isn't public yet, but there's a particular project that I've been asked to work on, that because a lot of the countries do not have enough staff for their data protection agencies to handle all of this stuff. Instead, a particular part of the EU has asked me to set up a program using this type of stuff to, proactively find these particular types of things, give them a warning and a fix-it, and get the stuff hidden and pulled offline. Because there just is not enough staff to enforce the EU GDPR, or even enough staff to enforce the UK laws here. So trying to be proactive before the fire starts.
One more question here in the back.
Hi, you mentioned all those vulnerable systems. I used to run a number of different types of honeypots back in a while just to study what people do. Have you ever had a situation where you've broken into a system but you realize you're part of a honeypot, you are the honeypot?
Yeah, no, because I can find the honeypot properties pretty easily. And another thing that I do is, if you saw that some of this stuff was from Census, that particular project started from the University of Michigan. And one of the key people behind that project was the person who set up Project Honeypot. So I work a lot with them to find and detect honeypots. And many times honeypots just are not set up correctly, and you can still scrape to find that it's honeypot or whatever type of honeypot pretty easily.
Okay, we've got time for one more question. No more questions? Okay, I'd like to thank Chris. Thank you very much, Chris.